Get excited, Scott, because we're doing things a little differently today. It's a special show with Pivot listeners calling in and asking us their questions on all sorts of topics. We're going to meet the people, Scott, the people.
I don't like surprises. At 49, I could slip and break a hip when you do this to me.
I think you're going to love it. Our first listener call ever. So this is a very exciting thing. Sean, welcome.
Well, hi, Karen, Scott. Thanks for having me on. I'll try to set the bar as low as possible for the subsequent listeners who are asking questions, so they don't have a tough act to follow. So I'm a longtime listener, and I'm an attorney, and I worked in private practice as a litigator for a while. And the past few years, I've worked in the public sector. I've got a question about your favorite.
Can I ask you a number of questions? Sure. Do you like the penis jokes? No, not that one.
I appreciate Scott's humor, but I feel like now being on the podcast, I'll be unemployable for the foreseeable future. So,
well, that's what we like to do here. We like to ruin careers.
Yeah. Thank you, Sean. Let's listen to your question. So
it's about Elon, and it's something of a legal question, but it's way outside of my area.
Who is it? Who?
Elon.
We've never heard of him. But
you don't talk about him on this show.
No.
But it's outside of my area of expertise.
Second biggest complaint, by the way, is we talk about too much about Elon.
So here's my question. In buying the platform, Elon's turned himself into the main character on Twitter, and he's repeatedly posted controversial tweets. In multiple instances, Elon's tweets have had a negative impact on the financial interests of X, not to mention Tesla. So what I want to know, if you guys have any insight into this, particularly you, Scott, since you've served on boards over the years, is there some reason, legal, practical, or otherwise, that no shareholder has pursued legal action against Elon, asserting that his tweets have constituted a breach of his fiduciary duties? And I'm putting that unsuccessful 420 lawsuit from a few years back in a separate bucket because it involved alleged fraudulent misrepresentations about the company itself, whereas some of his other tweets are just lightning rods for controversy that caused the stock price to dip. So I'm wondering if you guys have any insight on that.
Well, before Scott starts, there are some shareholder lawsuits around how and his behavior is noted in them, in several of them happening at various times. He's won quite a few of them. So including that one with the shareholders, but there are a number of shareholder actions happening. But go ahead, Scott. Why don't you talk about being on a board? Because I haven't been.
Well, you have to distinguish between a private and a public company. A public company is fertile hunting ground for plaintiffs' attorneys who, when they see anything resembling behavior that they think is bad for shareholders, they can initiate a class action suit. And typically, in a board meeting, you get a list of all the legal actions. And they're numerous, employees, all sorts of stuff. And plaintiffs' attorneys, while they play a really important role as sort of a check on corporate America, there are quite a few of them who the ecosystem is file a suit, and many companies will just settle. And there's incentive to file a lot of suits against companies that don't see, the distraction and the potential downside is worth it, and so they'll just settle. He's probably, when you're talking about X now, that it's a private company with what is a relatively finite number of shareholders, it's unlikely they filed suit because they're all his buddies, and as far as I can tell, the only reason they initially invested was hope that they would curry favor with him and have the opportunity to invest in the follow-on round of SpaceX or be one of the book runners, Sequoia, I can't imagine, consciously made a rational decision in isolation to put whatever it was, $200 million into X. But they think this is an ecosystem. We want to be involved in all of his other ventures. We want to have an opportunity to participate.
It's a VIG. It's essentially a VIG to hang with Elon.
In the Musk
seat at the table.
Yeah.
What's unusual, though, is it relates to what I have never seen. I don't think anyone's seen in governance. Earlier this week, he essentially took to Twitter to demand that he would get 25% voting control. And I think he knew that that would be impossible for a post-public company because he would be retroactively trying to create a new class of stock that had super majority voting control. I think he knew that wasn't possible, so the only way to get there would be to increase his stake and award him options that would get him to that 25% mark. He has options that if he exercises now, take him from 13 to 17%. I have never seen a CEO. I've been on boards where CEOs stamp their feet and threaten to leave over their compensation. I've never seen a CEO take to Twitter and threaten the company publicly or threaten the board unless he gets another $70 billion in compensation. But he is effectively a walking plaintiff's attorney dream. But he's created so much shareholder value. And Sean, after Care responds, I'd love to get your thoughts here. My sense is he sees the legal expenses as an expense of doing business the way he does business. He invites them. He knows they're going to come. But the dollars are so enormous here that he'd rather be aggressive, raise his profile, even at the risk of shareholder lawsuits. Kara, what do you think?
Yeah. And, I think a lot of CEOs do this privately, right? Sort of hold up a board
100%.
or threaten and things like that. And so he's just doing it publicly because he's that guy, because he gets to be that kind of asshole. But he, what's interesting is, as Scott said, a lot of tech companies have these dual class shareholders. And he didn't do it at the time Tesla was created, and probably wishes he had, but it's not, they can't do it now. They can't do it now. Now, what's interesting about this is he's essentially saying, I will withhold my leadership, right, from you unless you do this, right? That's what he's saying. I will not help you in the future. I won't help it with AI. Even though he's touted the company as an AI company and a robotics company, which it has very advanced robotics, it has very advanced AI. I'm not going to help you make wealth anymore until you pony up this money. Now, the other problem, besides the fact that it can't make a dual class structure, which I think would be to his liking, but it doesn't matter. He effectively runs the board. The board doesn't is not an independent board in any way, or doesn't behave like an independent board. This is a lawsuit over his compensation package actually going on. A shareholder, that said his compensation package was outsized, and it didn't require him to work full time. There's, he's complimented the Twitter board, but it's not a good look. It looks like he's sort of blackmailing the board. That's what it looks like. Although he said they like it, it's sort of like an abused spouse.
Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah. Well, I don't think they like it. I get the impression they don't have a choice with this guy.
What are your thoughts, Sean? You're the one that passed the bar.
Let me just say one more thing. They can't do anything until it will make this lawsuit win if the board doesn't do, if they suddenly award him this, because that's precisely what the lawsuit is saying. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, they moved their corporate base from, they were previously incorporated in Delaware, and they moved to Nevada. And, when you bring these shareholder lawsuits, I think that's one consideration, and the laws where they're incorporated. I think Nevada might have an intent requirement for these breach of fiduciary duty lawsuits, like as opposed to just careless behavior. There might be some intent requirement. And I think, Scott makes a really good point about how the people who are in bed with him at this point, they not only did they know what they were getting into, but they wanted that access. So that makes sense to me. But on his recent tweets, Kara, you brought up the fact that sort of the AI aspect of this. When I read that story, he wasn't just saying, I'm not going to work on some of these AI issues. I think he was at least implying that he was going to do it elsewhere.
Yeah, take it elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And does that change the calculus a little bit? He's not just saying he's not going to do X. He's saying I'm going to essentially perhaps compete with you to his own company.
Other people. I don't know if he has a non-compete. I don't know. I have no idea. But I assume there is an issue here because there's IP too, right? If he takes people, if he takes, other people. The guy at Google got in trouble for going over to Uber, right? There's all kinds of law about this, and I think that's what's interesting. He's essentially blackmailing them, and the issue is, will they do anything about it? And so far, this board has done nothing. Now, that opens them up to liability, but from talking to them, I don't think they feel like they have any power. I think they feel like they have and he's just doing it right to their face. It's not unlike what Trump does to the GOP. It's like, I'm just going to primary you. That's what he's saying from a business point of view. And so he puts them in a terrible position, and they cannot like it. And so, I don't. This guy breaks rules all the time, and sometimes it's good and interesting, and sometimes it's he just has decided not to play by any rules that anybody else has. And again, just like Trump in the court, who yells in court at the judge and makes faces? But he did like yesterday, and he's still not in contempt. So I don't know. I will see what happens. But both Scott and I don't know if you think this board is just is a paper tiger, not even a tiger. What is it? A paper
mache.
Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think Scott's talked repeatedly about how the corporate governance here is, to say the least, lacking.
Yeah.
So
it's a real test.
To say it's even uncharted water here is an understatement. It's not calculus. It's a different math that's never been seen before, because typically boards will err on the other side. Boards are usually full of what I call FIPs, F-I-P, formally important people. And sometimes their ego absolutely gets the best of them, and they won't do what's right for shareholders because they get angry and say, well, this activist, I'll show him. He's going to show up and threaten me. Or the CEO does something that pisses them off and they fire the CEO, even when maybe they should have just dealt with the ego of the CEO. In this instance, I mean, think about how just crazy this is. Elon Musk is the wealthiest person on the planet. The primary source of that wealth is Tesla. So he is now turning to the company that made him the wealthiest person in the world and threatening the board publicly on a platform that he bought by selling Tesla shares, that unless they pay him another $70 billion, he's going to take his ideas to another company while he's working at Tesla, which there's like 8 different things here that any other board would fire the CEO for. But what you have is his brother. You have several people who are so conflicted here. VCs, one person was involved in Solar City. This is just, it's literally an implosion in governance. And the retort would be, at the end of the day, it's about increasing shareholder value. And this guy has done it. So this guy, the argument would be he has earned the right to play by a different set of rules. And but I've never seen anything resembling this.
Yeah, we've got to go, Sean, but he's an adult toddler, and they're giving him sugar. I don't know what else to say. And they're going to keep giving him sugar until he breaks something, which he's done many times. Anyway, Sean, thank you so much. It was great to chat with you. We hope you don't lose your job, but
Thanks,
it was a great
Sean.
question.
Thanks.
Appreciate
Thanks very
it.
much.
Bye now.
All right, bye. Let's move on to our next caller, a doctor who reached out to us following one of our discussions about weight loss drugs. Hello, Dr. David Rooney, as in, no, it's Roney, right? David Roney.
Yeah. Do you love macaroni?
As in macaroni. I do love
Macaroni.
macaroni.
Roni.
Who doesn't?
Take the mac off,
There you
but
go.
you'll love me too.
Okay, all right. Okay, perfect. You're a robotic surgeon with a personal finance website. This is fascinating. Can you tell me just briefly about this?
Yeah, so that started because I don't like to be told I can't do anything, and I graduated from United States Naval Academy with no financial literacy, and then thought I was doing okay, and the great financial crisis started, and I called in to add some money to my account, and they told me I couldn't because the funds were closed, and then they told me I didn't warrant getting a financial advisor because I didn't make enough money, which didn't make any sense to me because I made the most money in my family at the time. So it created a chip on my shoulder, and I started learning as much as I could about finance. Next thing you know, I had accumulated a lot of knowledge. Fast forward to the pandemic, and I was watching people lose their jobs, and I couldn't understand what was going on and why these things were occurring. And my brother challenged me to help as many people as I could by just putting the knowledge in my head out there on the internet.
Good for you. Well, congratulations, Macaroni. Okay,
Thank
so let me. What's your question? You're also a doctor. So, you want to talk about weight loss drug affordability?
Yeah. So Professor Galloway. So you mentioned that Ozempic can be a world changer, right? It can be a thing that sort of leads to further breakthroughs and behavioral modification and getting people off of things they might be addicted to, right? Because that is a sort of benefit that is seemed to have occurred that they've seen in observation. People stop drinking as much, gambling as much, things of that sort. The thing that we never really consider, and healthcare gets a bad rap, right? It's clearly not a good system that is designed well as for the times that we're in. However, the thing that always slips underneath people is the fact that insurance plays a big role and goes unregulated, to the degree that they determine who can afford whatever they can afford. Most people can't afford a sort of, like they said, a $400 emergency, and the average car payment is $1,000. But Ozempic and the other GLP-1 agonists might be $1,200.
All right, question. What's your question? What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? Is that the question?
So the question is how do you envision that insurance is going to sort of change in the future in order to reflect the vision that you see carrying out?
First off, Doctor, and it always sounds patronizing when I say this, but I mean it as someone who went to Annapolis and decided not to go there and went to UCLA. I appreciate your service. If you're in the top decile of income earners in the United States, I think you have access to the best healthcare in the world, but it's the bottom 90 who are subsidizing it. And I think that one of the culprits, if you will, is the insurance industrial complex, which does a very good job of flying below the radar. I think the insurance in the United States on a lot of levels is literally the one of the biggest economic taxes that the poor pay. And I've talked about this a lot. I am not insured because I can afford not to be insured. It's poor and middle income households that can't be insured. Now, as it relates to GLP-1 drugs, I do think over time the benefits are going to be so obvious, and also the amount of capital going into the exploration of GLP-1 drugs is going to be so massive that it's going to create competitors and bring the cost down. And I do think the government's going to get involved, because here's the problem right now with GLP-1 drugs. It's not getting out to the rural areas where people are obese, and it's really impacting their lives in a negative way. I do think the market, to a certain extent, and government hopefully, will start to increase the distribution or disperse GLP-1 drugs. I'm hopeful that it happens. Bigger, broader issue, we need some form of healthcare reform that gets rid of this ridiculously fat and happy, expensive middleman that is weaponized government and creates regulatory capture, called the insurance industrial complex.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Scott has talked about a lot, and I think it's important, is to understand the system is good for nobody, including doctors. My brother's a doctor, as you might know, and I've never talked to any doctor who likes the insurance system or how to bill the billing system. They're so captured by it and spend a lot of time dealing with it that they should be treating patients, right? Or they want to be treating patients. And I don't know, from your perspective, it's complete. Everybody gets screwed but these insurance middlemen in some fashion, and it's completely unfair. And for these drugs, which they've still got to be tested. It's still they've been around for a long time for diabetes and everything else, but I think Scott's right. At some point, there's going to be so many of them, the price naturally will come down. But that's not always been true with drug prices, right? It hasn't been. But one might imagine at some point an over-the-counter version of these things, right? That it's going to be so in demand, and it will start at the top, and then I hate to use the word trickle down, but this one I think will in that regard. But the government should immediately be doing testing to try to deal with obese populations, to cut prices on this, this diabetes epidemic. It's, as Scott calls it, the insurance industrial complex. There's a diabetes industrial complex, which keeps people living, their health span dies long before their lifespan. There's a good story in the Journal about this. And that's where the costs come in, and they make all the money with these very sick people who don't have to be that sick. What are your thoughts, very briefly?
Briefly, it hasn't really come out, but if you talk to people who work in healthcare, you're going to notice that the economic incentives for insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies not to sort of reimburse this or not to add this to the formulary is completely there. To the fact that if you look at the starting doses of these medications, they're no longer available. So you can't even start people on these. And people are starting to cut corners.
People with diabetes, you're talking about.
People with diabetes. You can't start people on this medication if weight loss is the cure. If we think about it, diabetes, the first management is sort of diet and lifestyle modifications. And sort of if you add this into like the armamentarium of doing that, then that is a thing that can take place. I think we focus on the top 5% because we're a capitalistic society, and we leave the rest of folks behind, and then we complain about how they can't catch up when in fact, like, our system is doing it. We waited a long time to change the insulin prices, right? Like, I don't have a lot of faith that this is going to change anytime soon. And I see a lot of people saying how great this is, but I used to be poor. I was homeless. Like, I remember what it's like for my mother trying to get medicine. Like, this sucks. It's like physically painful to watch someone suffer.
I would agree with you. This is something I feel like especially as the studies come in and they have good results, that the government needs to get involved in. It's a national health crisis in many ways, and this is so typical of so many drugs, but in this case, it's one that could really save costs. Anyway, Dr. Roney, we've got to go, but it's a really great question.
I appreciate it. You guys have a blessed day.
Thank you, Doctor.
Up next, we have someone with a question about AI.
Good morning. It's exciting to be here. My name is Suzanne. I'm the Dean of Students at a very rigorous, independent high school. And my question, coming from a very highly resourced school that is much more concerned with getting it right than being right. And we're really wrestling with AI right now. And so my question is, do you believe that AI tools in education enhance or hinder students' creative abilities? And how can educators sort of balance the use of AI, the fact that it's coming, it's going to be here, with the need to really develop critical thinking skills and creativity?
Great question. I'll start, Scott. You were around for the dawn of the internet age, correct? Or when they were, remember Apple, you saved box tops or whatever to get computers in schools. You remember that era, correct? Yeah. So you can talk as much as you want, by the way.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
I'm used to just being, listening.
No, please don't.
Yeah.
Please don't.
Okay.
Please jump in anytime you want.
Yeah.
So I think this is a very similar shift, is that a lot of people at the beginning of that, everyone was putting computers in schools without thinking it through properly, right? And some of it worked. And some of it didn't. And some of it was, people were worried about websites and where kids went to and protection. And were they wasting their time? Were they playing games? It went on. And then everyone got laptops. Was that worth it? I think it reminds me quite a bit of that, except in this case, people are already computer literate. Your students are all highly literate in computers. They have grown up with computers. And so it reminds me a little bit of that. But, to say it's a hindrance or an asset, it's both. It's going to be a hindrance. There's all kinds of problems you're going to show. Not the media goes crazy about copying or plagiarism. I think that's been around forever. It's just a new way to plagiarize, and probably a better way, faster, better way. But you'll figure that part out, and I think you'll have your own software, and there is software that does that. But I do think one of the things that you should do is embrace it and use it, so you as teachers understand it. I think one of the things is initially, and I talked to Randy Weingarten about this. We were sitting in the audience with her at the AI thing that Biden put out, the executive order, and she turned around and she goes, "I'm not against this." To me, because I'm always like, "You're so negative, Randy," and she was like, "I'm thinking, I'm learning, I'm doing this," and I think that's probably the thing I say to most teachers is you yourselves got to understand it, because the kids absolutely get it, kind of thing, and they'll get it really quickly. Scott?
Nice to meet you. I had this warm emotion come over. When I was at UCLA, and I realized you're at a high school, I was close with the Dean of Students, Ray Goldstone, and the Assistant Dean of Students, Peter Weiler. They were both just such wonderful men, and all they did was put out fires all day. I remember thinking, when there was just an awful problem, no one knew what to do, it ended up at the Dean of Students.
Call Suzanne.
So thanks for your good and challenging work. I'm an AI optimist around this stuff. I think we should be, if you're trying to teach a kid how to write and put together a paragraph and, subject, whatever, no fragments, new thought, new paragraph, then there's going to be AI tools that can look at it. It's similar to how we have tools now to see if they're, if they're plagiarizing or whatever. You're going to have those tools. But in general, outside of them teaching them how to write prose, I think it's a tremendously powerful tool. I remember in my second year of business school, my professor of manufacturing, Sarah Beckman, who was just this outstanding professor, I remember when she said, I don't mind you using spell check. Some professors actually back then they thought it was cheating for you to use spell check. And as someone who writes a lot, I can tell you that what I found so far, and Carrie is the exact right word, that what AI produces is very anodyne. It doesn't compel or move anyone to emotion. But when I'm writing a blog post tomorrow on Bill Ackman and how basically money has taken the place of democratic institutions. And I was trying to come up with unexpected consequences. And I typed into GPT-4, what are the most unexpected but enduring consequences of the COVID pandemic? And it came up with 10 things, and 8 of them I knew, but 2 were different. And I'm incorporating that. I think it's just a great tool.
Research, yeah.
I think it's going to expand creativity. And what I would want to be doing is wrapping my arms around it and having classes, or not even classes, but maybe part of class, like, what are the right prompts to make your paper better? What are the right ways to think? What could you ask that would give you more examples? I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, that's why you need to use it. I advise everyone to use it every day for different things, even if you're not going to use it. One of the things that I think would work well is timelines. Like, there's certain things, why do them? I mean, you can do them, you can sit in front of you're doing it in front of an encyclopedia or the internet. Imagine the internet used to just take you to the pages and then you pulled off of them. Some people more than others, including Bill Ackman's wife, but off of Wikipedia. But people have been doing that for a while, paraphrasing or looking up in encyclopedias. This is like that. It dives into the content itself, which is why they're in so many content fights with content makers, as content makers should be suing them or doing a deal with them. But it's you have to be thinking of what it could be used for and how you can not waste time with students and get them to the real discussions. There's no reason why they have to use an encyclopedia or research papers to do a timeline when it could do it for you. It's not a skill to do that. It's just not. And that's fine. At some point, a lot of reporters are very reticent to use it. I was having an argument about headlines. I was like, why are we writing headlines anymore? We can pick them. What's important is then the teacher intervene and the student learns about being factual, how to use the research. Learning how to research, and this is how people are going to research in the future, is a critical thinking skill. And so once you have that there, it's sort of like clay. What are you going to make with it? And that's where teachers have to and should be stepping in. But to make it like they're going to cheat, the assumption of cheating immediately is kind of a terrible way to think of your students, right?
No, absolutely. And we don't. It's really more, we want to use these tools and teach the students how to use them in ways that are helpful. But we also want to make sure that their creativity isn't limited. So I love Scott's example that he typed in, give me 10 unexpected consequences. 8 of them he knew, 2 he didn't. And that's great. But we also want to make sure that our students aren't just going to that list of 10, which we know the large language models are pulling from stuff that's already happened. So it's how are they going to bring their own stuff into it? And the other thing that I'll say, and I am very familiar for somebody of my age with what's going on, is that we know that all learning happens in relationship. And so we need to make sure that the customized tutoring that Khan Academy wants to do or Grammarly doesn't take the place of those relationships, which is something that I think is so important. And here we are still seeing the impact of the isolation of the pandemic on our youngest students and their socialization skills. So
agreed. I think that's smart. I mean, I think, but that's why you need to join with the students who are also figuring it out. Like, avail yourself to their knowledge. I think they feel very good about that, explaining to you how they're using it. One of the things is, I agree with you on in-person stuff. My son's at Michigan right now. He was having some difficulty with, I think, a physics thing, and he was using AI. But he's now, he goes to a tutoring thing too, like where there's a person there so they can discuss the ideas. And I think you can do them in conjunction with each other in a way. For some reason, people think it's either or, and I do think technology can really aid you. And again, join with them. again, I think too many teachers that when they talk to me are like, how are they going to cheat? I'm like, well, how are they going to learn? Why don't you think that way? So it could, and some customized things could be interesting, right? Maybe they could design things. I think you're talking about serendipity, like the serendipity of learning, right?
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a really exciting time, and it can be, you can see it going sideways rather quickly, but you could also, obviously you're obviously a highly intelligent educator. It's like being scared of an iPhone, the internet's not the problem. I mean, it can be in many ways, but it's how people use it. And I think teachers have got to get digitized.
Sure. And one of the things that's so important always is that this is no different. The use of AI is no different than using any other unauthorized source.
Right.
And so we already have tools in place for that.
Yeah.
So it's not fear, more just.
Yeah, you don't know. Well, you know what?
Yeah.
It'll get better. I'm sorry to tell you. It's going to get better. We're going to. The last part of my book I just finished, I said, I used an AI thing as a joke at the end. And then I said, it's really bad. They wrote an end to my book that I said, this is just terrible. I said, but I'm going to get worse and it's going to get better. That's how it's going to go.
It's the worst it's ever going to be now. And that's just it's mind-blowing to think about it that way.
Anyway, we appreciate it, and we appreciate your work with students.
Thank you, Dean Suzanne.
How great was it to talk to all these listeners? I mean, they're really smarter than we are. That's a conclusion I just made.
I generally registered an emotion of intimidation because I thought, these people probably see through my bullshit. I mean, I was struck at how thoughtful and smart these people were.
It's really important to get other people's perspectives. We always like them even when we don't agree, and they challenge us.